Good evening, everyone. We're about to get started, so I encourage you to find a seat if you would like one. I'm Ana Luz Porzecanski, Director of the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation here at the American Museum of Natural History. Delighted to see you all here. It's really my pleasure to welcome you to this fascinating conservation about primate conservation. I must make sure I got this right. This is a public event, so we welcome all of you who just joined us right now. But seated around you and standing around you are also emerging conservationists from around the world who have joined us over the last 2 days at the Student Conference for Conservation Science New York, which is an annual conference that we organize every year here at the museum in October. And so you're surrounded by the folks who are doing amazing work and giving us a lot of hope. And seated here with me are Farwiza Farhan, who's an environmental activist and founder of Yayasan Haka Indonesia, and the 2016 winner of the Whitley Award for Conservation of Ape Habitats. And so a round of applause for Wiza. And at the end of the table, I'm going to go ladies first. Nora Bynum is director of the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum in Chicago. Welcome, Nora. Wonderful to have you here. And finally, Ekwoge Enang could not join us tonight, but joining us in his place tonight, we're very lucky to have Stan Kivai, who is a conference participant. So he's been with us for the last couple days presenting on his work, and he is a PhD student at Rutgers University and a conservation biologist at the Institute of Primate Research in Kenya. Thank you very much, Stan, for joining us tonight. Yes. So this is a very important topic, and I certainly don't want to speak too much because we have the experts here to talk to us, and we're going to have a great conversation. But we do think this is a fundamental topic. We have about over 600 species and subspecies of primates recognized by scientists, and close to 50% are at risk of extinction due to human activity. So this is a very serious topic, and we thought that it was very important to think about the big picture of how we can address this conservation and this real challenge. And so I just wanted to introduce how I think about kind of system-wide conservation approaches. And then I'm going to start with a question for each of you, and then I have a few questions for general discussion. And after about 35 minutes, we're going to give you a chance to ask them questions, all right? That's the plan. So let's see if this works. Why are we thinking big? Because there are many factors that affect primates in the world today. Now, this is based on a recent paper that looked at, global drivers affecting primates. And it's one way to look at things. So you have economic factors, social factors, ecological factors, and maybe conservation and mitigating factors. In that paper, they were saying all of them affecting loss of primate habitats. Now, I think it's a little more complicated than that, and I was just playing around with this, and I think there are many more factors. There are cultural factors, there's health and disease, and there's many factors we don't even know about yet. There's a question mark at the bottom, might be a little hard to see, and they are affecting both primate habitats and primates themselves through hunting and other kinds of conflict, right? And in addition, to make things even more complicated, they're all affecting each other. They're interacting, right? And I think conservation really can be done, progress can be achieved at any of these, in any of these dimensions, right? It's not a separate factor, but it really can happen through all of them, as we're going to see here today. So as they talk, I'm going to show a few pictures. But Wiza, I want to start with you. Good evening. Try out the microphone. There you go.
Hi.
So
I think it worked.
Yes. Good evening. So your work has shown that change is possible. You have made amazing progress through your work in Indonesia. through environmental litigation and unprecedented results, really bringing millions of dollars of fines to companies that are breaking the law and working in the Loiser ecosystem. And so I wanted to ask you, I'm going to show everybody the Loiser ecosystem, there we go. What motivated you to become involved in conservation here? And tell us about what has allowed you to have these successes so far.
How many minutes do I have?
You have about 3 or 4 minutes, but you can keep talking about your work throughout the whole panel.
Okay, so in summary, I started off as a marine biologist. I fell in love with the ocean. I fell in love with the coral reef. But then I grew up in a place where there's not much development, but because of climate change, the sea temperature rise. And I, year after year, watched the coral reef in front of my own home die. And that gave me a feeling of despair. So at some point I thought, I'll switch over, I'll start focusing on forests, and I start encountering the Loiser ecosystem. Although it's in Aceh, it's a place where I come from, I don't know much about it. We tend to take things for granted. Learning about the Loiser ecosystem, learning about the amazing species living within that place, and if you're not familiar with the Loiser ecosystem, this is something that I'll repeat over and over. It's the last place on Earth that still have rhino, elephant, tiger, and orangutan roaming together in the wild. It is really, really that last place. If we lose this, we don't have any more of that. But then luckily, the Loiser ecosystem is the largest insect forest we still have in Sumatra. So there's lots of hope, lots of things at stake. And why do I do this? What gets me into conservation? Initially, it was a coincidence. Initially, someone practically offered me a job and said, like, how do you feel about joining our team? And I'm like, sure, I don't know what your team is. I don't know what you're doing, but it seems awesome, why not? And through that, I start to fall in love with the place, and once that happened, it's hard to let go.
Thank you. Look, I'm going to show some of the pictures of the work you've done. It seems that deforestation appears to be the problem at first, right? If we look at some of the information, for example, of the most important habitats and places for primates around the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and the neotropics. As a coincidence, you three work in these 3 places, and there's been at least 150 million hectares of forest lost in 20 years there. And so you would think deforestation would be a key problem, but there's more behind it, right? And when you look at the pictures, for instance, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the Loiser ecosystem that's driving deforestation and some of the impacts that that is having? What are we looking at?
The picture behind you show, why suddenly get so loud?
It's good.
This is an oil palm plantation. This might look green, but this is a monoculture. For oil palm plantation to look like this, forest has to be decimated, cleared, all the species pushed out of their habitat, and often the land needs to be burned before they could start growing this oil palm plantation. And this is the impact. A story about this orangutan, the habitat, the area where he lived has shrunk so much because of the pressure of oil palm plantation. At some point, it needs to be rescued before it becomes pest. In places like the US, Europe, Australia, you guys might have a picture of an ape and think how amazing it is we need to conserve this species. For the local people who have this kind of interaction with apes on a daily basis, often they see this species as pests. Orangutan whose habitat have shrunk so much would be forced to start looking for food elsewhere. And as the result, people will start trading baby orangutans, people will start killing adult orangutans, and the impact is direct. You cannot love something that starts competing with you for food, for livelihood. And what we do, we galvanize support. We galvanize community support, and we galvanize national and international support. So if any of you have ever signed any petition to protect this habitat, do remember that you have help. If any of you donated to local organization working to protect ape habitat, you have help. And this is how global international community have come together to protect this place. A few years ago, there was an oil palm company that burned 1,600 hectares of forest. Forest fire in Indonesia is a big issue. It's really hard to solve because you could never really caught the person lighting the fire firsthand. But then the law have changed, and now the company could be held accountable for allowing fires to take place within their concession. But it was only 3 years ago when we had our first win, when an oil palm company was fined $26 million for burning forests. That never happened before.
For a lawsuit that you brought on, is that right?
A little bit.
I think it was very brave work, I think, what you've done. And because of that work that her organization did, I think that set the stage for even other wins. And so this is just to illustrate the work you do with the community. I'm just going to show you a couple of images, elephants. And this was a record settlement, or a record fine that happened just a few months ago, really. And I think that the work you've been doing set the stage and was a precedent for this, right? I would agree. I would argue.
I wouldn't go around claiming credits for the work that other people are doing, but there's a lot of work that goes into setting the precedents, and there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that get upheld in court and beyond.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to Nora next, actually. Sorry, Stan. I just realized that the slides are in that order. So, Nora, the Keller Science Action Center has led rapid inventories. And these bring together hundreds of partners, really, to survey critical regions for biodiversity and have fostered the protection of 32 million acres of wilderness, mostly in South America. So what makes this approach effective? Tell us about this approach, and how do you connect these inventories to policy?
Good evening. It's really great to be here. I have to say I've been affiliated with the museum a long time, and I think this is my new favorite place to speak.
Great. Come back anytime.
So I think what makes our approach, the rapid inventories, effective is that basically we work in areas where we've been asked to work, whether that's from the local people or from the governments. And this often means that there's an existing interest and support for establishing a protected area. And I think that that makes a great deal of the difference. But even more important is that we not only work to document biological diversity, we also work with local communities to find out from them what they regard as their most important assets and what they have in terms of hopes and dreams for the areas in which they live. The biodiversity and community social information that the team gathers as part of the inventory can then be used by local people as they organize themselves to try to support the protection of these protected areas. This follow-up is really where we link the inventories to policy. Just a little bit more about the inventories. These usually take about 3 weeks. We have a social team and a biological team, and we work with the geology. We characterize the geology, and next. We work with herpetofauna, frogs and snakes and lizards. Next. And of course, we work with local communities. We work with indigenous communities and also with campesinos. Next. And we work with large mammals such as this woolly monkey. Next. And again, of course, with the communities. And frogs. And local people.
And birds.
And birds. So I just wanted to show you this really quickly in terms of how quickly things can change. 15 years is not really that long of a time. And as you can see, in 2000, there were very few protected areas in this part of Peru called Loreto, the Department of Loreto. Next, please. Here you can see how many more protected areas have been established over this intervening 15 years. And certainly this was not all Field Museum, but we were involved in many of these. And just for the sense of scale, I want to flip through these next slides. You can just go one after the other. These are protected areas, and then in the yellow are the areas where the Field Museum ran these inventories and the opportunities for protection. And this gives you an idea that we have now done so many of these inventories that we can actually start thinking about large-scale corridors rather than just individual protected areas, particularly when we're thinking about large-ranging animals such as most primates.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we'll go back to the part that the community plays maybe in a minute. So, yeah. Stan, coming back to you, you've worked for several years in primate conservation in Kenya. And in fact, you're the secretary of the National Primate Action Plan in Kenya. But you've spent the last 4 years here in the United States doing your PhD on primate nutrition ecology, in particular in the Tana River Primate Park. And so tell us why this ecosystem is important and why you think more scientific information is important.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. That's really a very important question, and like you've mentioned, I work in the Tana River ecosystem in Kenya, and this is a very critical ecosystem because it actually supports two of the primate species which I would say they are considered to be one is among the top 25 most endangered species, and because of that, it overrides the other, which is the Tana River Mangabey. And the ecosystem is really very important as also a wetland ecosystem. It supports a lot of endangered bird species, and most important, it is one of the world's most biodiversity hotspots. So thinking about primates and their habitats and food, I thought is really important. And this is not only important to primates, or I mean to non-human primates, it's also important to humans as the non-human primates struggle to find good food out there. Humans, at the same time, they are struggling with problems related to food. Since, as you know, like currently, people are now struggling to look for solutions for lifestyle diseases, which are actually attributed to food or diet, the styles or changes in diet intake. So looking at the Tana River Mangabey and the Tana River primate ecosystem at whole is really very important. And we can only tie that to food to make a lot of sense in terms of saving the species from extinction, because one of the key problem or key threat which is driving this species and other species still in the same habitat is loss of the habitat. And this is due to agricultural production, whereby we are losing a lot of forest, which is being converted to farmland. And at the same time, human population is also growing at a very alarming rate, and we don't have any restoration efforts. And the kind of research we've had there is like intermittent. People come and go, so we've not had like very continuous kind of data that can really help us to make very informed decisions.
Yes, so during lunch you were telling me that the area where you work, for instance, doesn't have any resident researchers, is that right?
Exactly, that's the other problem. And this throws another factor which really seems to drive conservation in this area, and this is the whole issue of terrorism. And Tana River is less than 100 kilometers to the Somalia border. And because of that, we've had cases whereby the terrorist groups from the Al-Shabaab group sometimes cross over and take refuge in this forest. And it makes it very hard for researchers, particularly those people who are not really from the local area, to continue working there and providing information which can help in conservation of these species. And to make matters worse, sometimes when the military go in to flush out these people, they actually do some activities which we believe are really going to have negative impacts on these species.
Such as what? Such as burning the forest?
Like sometimes, because of the activities they are having there, we have fires which actually destroy some of these forests. And in most of those areas, these are the core primate habitats because we have less human disturbance. As you know, this is where the terrorists would like to seek cover, like deep in the forest. And unfortunately, we don't know even the population status of these primates in these forests. So that complicates everything.
So I see that research, thank you. I think that shows that research and other types of actions can really help us move forward. So what Stan just mentioned, I think, is perhaps a driver or a factor causing population declines in primates that wouldn't be evident, perhaps, for some who think just of deforestation, right? So in the places where you work, for example, Wiza or Nora, what would you say are some other kinds of connections and drivers that are not evident, perhaps, for those who are not so familiar with those systems?
In Indonesia, one of the big issues is regulatory complexity. There is a whole bunch of laws that is overlapping and canceling one another. So it's a lot of gray area for people to do something illegal. On top of that, we're also facing the demands of deforestation clearly play a major role in decline of primates population in Indonesia. But then the driver, if deforestation is not that obvious, it's not always so obvious, land tenure is an issue, demands for that have implications for oil palm companies when in other parts of the world might be going to the path of intensification. But in Indonesia, there is a feeling that we need to expand as large as we can for later, when there's no more land, we would have enough. Then we start intensification. And also consumer demands. When consumer in other part of the globe don't care, don't ask the producer where the products come from.
So for instance, I know that for oil palm, from palm oil, there is a lot of demand that comes from outside of Southeast Asia. So what would you tell this audience that is, has a lot of folks from New York to watch out for?
Practically just read the label, get yourself educated, because there's no excuse to be ignorant. You simply can't say, I don't know. I don't know if there's palm oil. I don't know where this palm oil come from. It's not acceptable. So for folks in New York, you do play a role. Half of the food in the supermarket contain palm oil. At least check where does oil palm come from.
Thank you. Nora, can you think of other kind of factors or drivers that may not be evident?
Well, I wanted to mention that in the Amazon region in particular, there's an issue with large infrastructure, such as dams and mines and roads. But those things don't just spring into existence. Somebody has to pay for them. And oftentimes, tracing it back, that's where you can see where this driver is really coming from. And at least in the present day, and with the new elections that have taken place in Peru and the new openness to foreign investment, it looks like it's the Chinese government that is mainly investing in these large infrastructure projects. Now, in other years, it's been different people, different countries at different stages of their development. But the issue right now for Peru is primarily Chinese investment. And I don't think that that's something that people really think about.
But so then that creates another problem, which is, both at the national level and even at the global level, but also at the very local level, how do you empower and motivate a community or a government to engage sustainably with global market forces if those promise a better life for families in the region or for the nation. That's the real challenge, and I wonder, if you have any thoughts on how to balance those, perhaps at the local level, perhaps at the national level. What are some thoughts that you may have on that?
Well, I think that for us, with the work that we do with the inventories and working with communities, we think that the best thing that can happen as a result of the inventory and as a result of the establishment of the protected area is that the community develops the skills that it needs to decide its own future and what it will do with its resources. And we encourage communities and our partners, because our efforts as the Field Museum, we work with hundreds of partners in the course of these inventories. And we just think that, excuse me. What was I saying?
You were saying the communities really have to be empowered to make their own decisions, right? Yeah.
Well, that's right. The communities have to be empowered to make their own decisions. And in the long run, I think that's the only thing that will help communities in any case.
Yeah.
Is that I think that we have to accept that as outsiders, we don't necessarily know what is best for communities, but we hope that those communities themselves do.
Stan, you've been working with communities too. I actually have a couple of photos, so maybe you can tell us a little bit. That's the Tana River Mangabey, right? Yeah. And then we have a couple of photos. That's the...
that is the Tana River red colobus.
The colobus.
Yeah.
And you have been doing some education and outreach. Let's see if this goes. There you go. I can go back to the other one, but
okay.
This is the kind of work you've been doing with the community. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, absolutely. First, I want to concur with what he is saying. Like, we need to empower the communities and enable, let them take lead in these conservation initiatives. Maybe if I can give an example of the area I'm working. Yeah. When I went there, I was really surprised. They tend to associate every single kind of conservation project or research with a particular person who really came to work there. So you will hear something like Stan's project, John's project, or John's Mangabey's. So that tells you they have that kind of feeling like they are not part of what you're doing. And this is because we do come, we have our own ideas, and we make a mistake because we don't integrate them and let them hone the processes. Because if we talk of doing conservation, it should be continuous. It's not something we'll do for a year and forget about it. And at the same time, we also need to build the capacity of the local people. So for the work I'm really doing, I've come to realize because of the local politics, the hold guys, because of past historical things, maybe to do with what she has mentioned about land tenure, they believe conservation is all about coming and taking away our land for conservation or putting up protected areas. So it's very hard for us to fight that kind of attitude in handouts. So I've decided to focus on young guys in schools, in elementary and high school, and I'm actually getting very positive response to that. And something I want to say is if we want that bright future, we have to create a critical mass of young people who are really responsible and ready to take responsibility when it comes to conservation of our environment. So I think empowering the community, letting them hone the processes and the initiatives in the conservation will be actually one of the most important steps, which will actually enable us to win the war of saving species and ensuring that they persist even for the future generation.
Thank you, thank you.
And yes. Maybe you can go back a little bit.
Yeah, I can.
I wanted to talk about this, which seems to be another cryptic kind of threat, which is really coming in a very big way, and people may not be realizing that.
It's an invasive plant, right?
An exotic invasive species, which was introduced in Kenya in 1980s to control floods in one of the arid areas in the central part of the country. But now it has spread and taken over almost like everywhere in the country you'll find it. And in the Tana River, where people are now cutting down forests to meet their food needs, they've come to realize, like, even the agriculture, when they cut down the forest, it's not really like productive enough to give them enough food, and they abandon the land. And what we've seen happening, this is the first colonizing species in those areas. And once it establishes itself, it starts pushing other species. And as you can see in that photo, it's the only species in that area. You'll be shocked if I tell you there was so many other indigenous species of trees and shrubs where it is now, and it has replaced that. But most of the people seem not to care about it. And the other problem is we also have other problems which are connected to these invasive species. For instance, in the areas where it was introduced, it's now been found to be causing a lot of dental problems with livestock. And now primates in Tana River have switched to it. They have identified it as a good source of food. So we don't know what other health implications will add to already the existing threats to the primates. So we also need to be very careful with the actions, especially like most of you have mentioned in the conference, of like reassembling the biota.
Yeah. The community, yes.
Yeah, we need to be careful with introductions, and we have to do something.
You have mentioned at least two things that really stand out to me, and one is this idea that we can't just think short term and act short term through projects, that we need to think of this as an ongoing process. In fact, I recently heard somebody refer to conservation or to our endeavors in conservation as an infinite game that we're always going to be playing. And we need to be aware of that and go with the right attitude for it. It's a never-ending game. The rules are always changing. The players are always changing. And you need to keep zooming in and zooming out and paying attention to know how the system is changing. You were going to add something, Nora, to what he was saying previously.
I don't know if this is a direction you want to go in, but it seems like the three of us have talked many times about communities and the role of communities. Yes. But something that I think about a lot, and I bet you do too, is how to take this to scale. How to make it more than just a local effort. And I wondered if the two of you had any ideas in that area.
Would you like to add? Working at the national level, Wiza, is that something that you're trying to do? Or the region?
Still working on that, but practically taking the multi-level marketing approach into conservation by means of, we know that once people learn they could do something, they will start continue doing that. Either it's something illegal or it's something positive, like protecting the environment. And we learn that everyone make decisions that make sense to them. So what makes sense to them is different for each and every one of us, for every community members, for government officials, law enforcement officials, conservationists, and scientists. We learned that when you show a group of community that they could win when they're fighting against company, that they could win when they fight to protect their land, their peers will start pushing the same thing. And you could take those community, bring them to other places, some kind of exchange, but not labeled exchange, or group them together. And this is still an experiment, so you will hear about it when we know more. Take them into a position where they are working together as a unit, working together, pushing for bigger goals, goals that initially they think is impossible, goals that people might make fun of them when they start. Because only 3 years ago, I got that phone call from a community member who have fought against this company for 20 years, but getting no result. through the campaign, through the international attention, our first win, he got so excited. He called me and he was like, did we actually win? Did the judges really make that decision? Like, is this for real? Is the company director actually go to jail? Oh my God. And since that happened, at least about 12 other lawsuits have happened in that area. So that's you know.
Very inspiring, very inspiring. I know that you've worked on exchanges as well of that kind, right, Nora? And do you have something to add, Stan? Yeah.
I need to add something on what you said. Like, we have also to take conservation to the national or global level. And one of the main thing is we need the goodwill of the governments, especially in the African countries where we have the primates, because most of the decisions or the policies which actually govern wildlife conservation and management are kind of decided at the parliamentary level. So with these, we have situations whereby we have certain species stealing the show in the national arena. But when it comes to primates, if you're not talking about chimps or if you're not talking about gorillas, you are nowhere in the picture. So we need to change the mindset of our policymakers and actually make them aware about the crucial roles which these other species actually play in the ecosystem and why it's very valuable for us to conserve them. And then to add to what Fawzia has said, in Tana River, we've had conflicts between the Kenya Wildlife Service and the local community because of creation of these protected areas. But in the recent past, what we've seen is actually a very strong wave of the local communities coming together, and they want to support conservation initiative. And how did this start? It all started with the community exchange programs. We have areas where communities have really done an amazingly good job in terms of conservation. And then we have other areas which are really like anti-conservation. And when you can take people who are like key leaders in that particular community and actually expose them to what is happening to other places and let them appreciate the value of conservation, this can really have a very big impact in terms of attitude change. And that is one of the good strategies which has really worked in our study side. So I need to
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Did you want to add to that, Nora? And then
just very briefly, I would say that I think that partnerships, if you're going to be taking things up to scale, that you have to be working with partners. And that's certainly something that we're thinking about all of the time. So I imagine it's the same for you.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask us a question that's a little different from what we've been talking about, because some of the articles and chapters that have come out about primate conservation recently, there's been an argument that because by 2030, less than 10% of African great ape habitat and maybe only 1% of Asian ape habitat will not have human activity in it. And so many are arguing that what we need to do is not just focus on, say, protected areas and how can we kind of keep the primates aside, but more really begin to study and find ways for us to coexist. And what does this mean? What does this mean for humans, and what does it mean for primates? And I was wondering what you think about this idea of, you know, focusing more on that and how it would play out in the areas where you're working. Anybody?
Well, I'll start. I think that the problem is, as I see it, is that most of the great apes are outside of protected areas. And so in many ways, Ana, I think that we're forced into this situation where we have to be thinking about how we can coexist outside of protected areas. And I know this is the same thing that you said for the Tana River monkeys as well. In my opinion, I don't think that there's any way around the fact that in order to decrease ape-human conflict, you have to decrease the contact between the apes and humans. So I think any strategy, we can talk about coexistence, but I think that the needs of our great ape cousins are such that I don't think they'll do very well if they have direct and sustained contact with us. So that's what I've been thinking about.
So the question is really how to balance that in a way, right? Because the coexistence is going to have to happen, but we have to engineer it almost in a way.
But it's going to take compromise on our side as well.
Yes.
There are certainly areas that we may have to agree that we won't go or that we will set aside. I don't think there's any way around that.
Yeah. What does this look like in your system, for example, Wiza or Stan? Who wants to start?
Maybe to add something on that, I really have the same idea with what she has said. And however much we really need research to guide conservation, I think there are some aspects of conservation which if we sit and have to wait for results to come out, tell us what to do, probably we'll lose some of the population or species.
Yes, so there's a lot of urgency.
So my thinking is like research, conservation should proceed simultaneously. And we should take advantage of the emerging techniques which can actually give us like quick ideas on the direction we should move towards. And we've seen some of these techniques coming out in the presentation, like modeling,
spatial modeling.
Yeah,
yes.
Understanding how species react to habitat disturbances.
Yes.
And also we have to understand that primates also have a very high ability to adapt to these changes. Like when we talk of apes, we already have some results from some work going on in West Africa from Kimberly Hawkins, showing that like we have chimps populations which are cooperating, and their activity patterns kind of reflect avoidance of humans, and by doing that, they tend to coexist very well with humans in these settled landscapes. So as we think of ways to coexist with the species, I would say the species are almost are way ahead of us. Like I've mentioned the Tana River. We have a new species coming in, invasive species. They've discovered it's a new good source of food.
Right.
Although we don't know what impact it will have, but that's a kind of a strategy they are actually trying to cope with the changes in the environment. So I would say let's take advantage of the techniques which will give us the direction we should proceed, and at the same time we need also to make decisions based on facts. So let's do research. Let's take advantage of these techniques to make quick interventions, and by doing so, I think we'll do a good job.
Right. So we do partnerships, we do conservation, we work with the communities, we do the research, and then when you face a situation where the primates cannot adapt, because if you have a palm oil plantation, there's no way they can adapt to that environment, then you have to work in the legal realm, and you have to do activism, and you have to do many other, community organizing at the same time. So depending on the system and the confluence, I think, and the urgency and the scale of the problems, I think you have to have a toolkit, right, of actions that you're pursuing at the same time. I'm wondering, what do you think we're missing in our primate conservation efforts? Like, what could we be doing more of, based on your experience and the work that you're doing? Wiza, what do you think?
I think inherently we need a paradigm shift. We've always put conservation on the opposite side of development, when in reality, our entire economy, our living being depends on the health of our ecosystem. So we cannot say, do we choose conservation or we choose development? Because the truth is we need conservation for development. And conservation of species is practically an overspill. It's a bonus out of conserving habitat. And out of conserving habitat, out of conserving ecosystem, we get ecosystem services, there's also a bonus for human. But regardless, we need this healthy ecosystem for both of us, for all of us.
I think that by taking legal action like you have been doing and being successful, it does contribute to change and shift the paradigm, because it does send the signal that the services are valued and that the law is there for a reason and it needs to be respected, right? And so, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say that I think that one of the things that we need for conservation is a lot more funding and on a sustained basis. In recent years, the funding situation in terms of conservation and in terms of primates, I think there's been some recognition of higher amounts that are needed, but it's nowhere near what is actually needed. And you know, billions of dollars are spent on many things in the world, and conservation to this date has not been one of them.
I think that's a very good point. So before I turn it over to the audience for questions, I wanted to ask you one last question, and then maybe afterwards another last question. But you know, I was wondering, what gives you hope for the future? You said that you started working with coral reefs, and that was, you know, we've been talking in the conference actually, after 2 days, being together with a number of conservationists from around the world about walking the line between hope and despair. And how it is a balancing act sometimes in the world today. And so I was wondering, you said that was too daunting, working in the marine realm. Now you've been working in forests and primate conservation, and you've had some victories. So what else gives you hope for the future? I'd like to hear from each of you.
Little things, celebrating this. Yeah. Does it work? Okay. Little things, celebrating small wins every day. I mean, conservation at the end of the day could be quite mundane, sitting in front of the computer, analyzing data, working on reports and all these things. But at the same time, when you go through the camera trap records and you see, wow, there's a new orangutan back in the forest that has recently been restored. That restoration only 5 years old. And the forest start to grow back, and you start seeing species coming back. That gives hope. And then we see baby elephants or baby rhino. They have growing population. Oh my God, we don't know that. So that gives hope. And at the same time, those little phone calls from community that say, we beat down the companies. We managed to shut down their operation. We're proud of ourselves. That gives hope.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Stan, how about you?
I would say first, we need to have that hope. Otherwise, if you don't have hope in conservation, you will despair, and it's not really a good thing. But how, maybe drawing the experience I have from the side I've been working, there is really a lot of hope. Like the work I'm doing with the young people, they seem to show now a lot of passion to the environment and a lot of passion and the need to conserve the resources. I would say, although climate change is really having very negative impacts on our livelihoods, at the same time, it has come as a lesson to the bad things we've been doing to the environment. And like in the Tana River ecosystem, the forests which they cleared, they are no longer reproductive in terms of agriculture. They've abandoned them. They are actually now regenerating, although we have now another problem of invasive species. And with time, I see them trying now to see practically the impacts of what we've been telling them over a long time. And with that, we are actually seeing some sort of change in terms of how the activities impact on the environment. Great. So with what is happening and how the increased information people are getting, I think there is really hope in conservation. We only need to keep pushing hard.
Wonderful. Nora, what gives you hope?
Whiza, I love that you talked about camera trapping. Camera trapping is like my secret vice. Because it means that somewhere out there, animals are out there living their lives, basically free to do what they want to do. But what really gives me hope is participating in the student conference this past couple of days. and seeing this marvelous group of, how many, 350, 350?
Yeah, about.
Students, graduate students, undergraduates, postdocs from around the world, and seeing the energy and the passion that they're bringing to that work. That is what gives me hope.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. You can add something, and then we're going to turn to the add something.
Oh, go on then.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you'll get a chance, I'm sure, because you're going to get some questions. So, do we have some roving mics in the audience, and I would love to have some of your questions for Wiza, Stan, and Nora. We have one in the front, and a couple on that side. So.
Hello.
Hi. Can you say your name and where you're from?
My name is Kate, and I'm from New York.
Great.
I love wildlife, so thank you all for coming out to speak to us. My question, I guess, is directed towards, I forget your name, I'm sorry, the woman from Indonesia.
Wiza, Farwiza.
So when citizens are seeing these wild animals as basically impacting negatively their lifestyles and competing with them for food sources, how do you then show those people that the wildlife is important to preserve when it's directly impacting them negatively? If they're, taking up land, taking up just methods for them to make money and take care of their families. What do you do to change that?
Well, sometimes we just need to remind the people that we are the one encroaching into their habitat. It's not them coming into our homes. The communication with local people is actually, it's quite grounding because it's directly their livelihood at stake. But then at the same time, if you talk to them, you realize that the bigger problem is these people have their, get pushed out of their land by companies. They are forced to go into protected areas and habitats of these species that make them come into direct contact with these endangered species. It's a bit, if we remind them, imagine if someone just come into your house and start emptying your fridge and doing that every day and start taking all of your furniture one by one. You wouldn't like that. It's the same thing that we are doing to this wildlife. And by giving that realization, making the image of primates as being one of us, give community the same kind of awareness that they don't intentionally want to decimate this wildlife. By reminding them to keep the forest intact, we could reduce this conflict. By reminding them that to not go that far into wildlife habitat, try to protect their land, try to fight against the company instead, they'd have a better chance both to develop their own economic opportunity as well as continue to have resources they need.
I would like to add also that it's important to remember that, in our case, in New York City, we've already pushed many species out, right? And here we are, and here we've been. And yet, some of them are coming back, like coyotes, for example. And that's the time when we have to think, well, at some point we did push them out, and perhaps we need to think, what sacrifices does coexistence demand of us as well, even here in New York City? So I think that's a great question. Do you want to add? Yes.
Thank you for that question. And I think one of the challenges I've really come across in the field of primate conservation is actually the non-human wildlife conflict. In Tana River, when I went there, I had one of my worst experiences. I met this little boy who is named Swalem, and he was attacked by a baboon when he was 2 years, and is now about 8 years, and the boy can't speak. He lost his speech, and that becomes really touching. And even when we think of systems which actually act as incentives for conservation to the communities, at some point you feel like, oh, these are not really like equivalent to the kind of
Sacrifices, or
sacrifices
impacts,
they
yeah.
make. But at the same time, when you talk with the communities, they really appreciate living with the wildlife, like the primates, because they've existed with it for a long time. And to some point, they kind of identify with the wildlife. So they already appreciate, like, we've had this species with us for a long time, and they also play a very critical role in our cultural values. And when you throw in the concept of incentives for conservation, like maybe like in Kenya we have compensation schemes, and if you get like your crops destroyed by by wildlife, or you lose your livestock to predators, you get some compensation. Although it's not that much, actually it gives you that hope, like still there is goodwill, and we can really do something to help our coexistence with these species. But I would say it is really hard, but we have to educate the people, have those good incentives and alternative livelihoods, which will actually make the community appreciate the value of living with wildlife.
Thank you, thank you. I'd like to move to another question. Yes, in the back, yes.
Hi.
Tell us your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Christian Rivera. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University. Thank you so much for your talk. My question has...
I think I'm going to ask the crowd to just speak a little bit lower. I think maybe as the drinks are flowing, folks are a little, if we can keep it down just a little bit, the background noise, that will be helpful. Thank you.
My name is Christian Rivera. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University. I want to go back to the palm oil issue. And you suggested that, you know, reading the labels is a great way to educate oneself and say, okay, it has palm oil in it, this doesn't. How do you address the issue of individuals, families, communities from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, and I'm referring to the US now, who go into supermarkets and they're not thinking about sustainability, they're not thinking about conservation, they're not thinking about organic foods. Is it still hard to hear? And that's not on their mind. They don't read the labels. They're thinking about feeding their families. And again, it's contextual, so I'm thinking about maybe my friends' experiences, etc. So how do you address that issue?
Do you understand his question? He's asking about, you know, customers, for example, in New York, who may be from areas where they don't have a lot of options in terms of what they can buy in the supermarket, and they may not be thinking about the environmental impacts of their food, but cost may be the primary concern for them. And so they may have to make that choice first, to consume foods that have palm oil. So do you have some thoughts on that? I have one thought. Do you want me to start? I think that's a bigger problem, right? It's not just about the consumers, it's also about food policy and the food industry and the regulations that we have and don't have. And so that's another case where policy and legal action and activism become very important, so that we can tackle that both on the side of the consumer but also on the side of the food industry. So that's one thought that I have, but do you have other thoughts to add?
I secretly pat myself on the back because I have the same thought of you. Because I think you're awesome, but here's something inherently wrong. Palm oil are only cheap because the external cost is not factored into the price of the oil palm plantation. The human cost, the wildlife cost, when oil palm plantation burn forests, lots of people in Indonesia, last year, over 100,000 people get respiratory infection. Over 100,000 people. Hundreds of children died out of this. Does this cost get incorporated into the cost of oil palm that get produced and factored into your food? No. At the moment, not. but certain things need to inherently change. So the cost of food that contain oil palm seems cheap. It's not. Somebody else is taking the burden.
Nora?
I just want to make the point that by the time you make the decision not to eat palm oil, that the forest has already been cut down. And so I think that the intervention and the change has to happen much earlier.
Well, we need both probably to prevent future deforestation.
Yes.
And
Defi-
also to
definitely we
change
need
the
both.
system, I
Yes.
guess. Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for your question. Where's the mic? Who has the mic? Great. We're going to come to this side. Yes. Tell us
Hi.
your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Sharon DiScrofano. I am from New York City, and among other things, I am a member of the Committee on Animal Law for the New York City Bar Association. So I thank all three of you for your insights today. Working in animal protection, using the laws that we have, even domestically, we're continually, it's a creative process. There aren't a lot of laws for animals, as you know, so we rely on environmental law like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and then some other environmental laws. We work on food law and food policies. So especially my work is mostly domestic rather than international. Right now, actually, the annual Animal Law Conference was just actually held for the first time in New York a couple of weeks ago. It's not been here hosted in the city before. And one of the things that is going on right here in New York is a landmark case with primates that I don't know, it's been organized by the Non-Human Rights Project. And it has to, I don't know if you've talked about it during your conference at all, but especially with primates, it's this legal initiative that is ongoing to get primates personhood, legal personhood. And that's different. I want to distinguish it from the people in the audience. For the people in the audience, is not saying they're persons. Corporations are persons legally. So it's basically, we're not trying to say, or the people who are directly working on it, not trying to say that a chimpanzee who's in captivity right now is a person, but it's somewhere in between. Legally, they have a status that gives them certain rights where we recognize that they're more than property, they're more than a chair, they're sentient beings. And it's an important case because it's not focused on the bad conditions that the chimps are in, but literally just saying they have certain property, certain things about them that
they
separate them.
have some rights, yes.
Right.
And so if you could like summarize it in a question for the panel.
So my question is, and I just wanted to kind of give that framework. The question is this. The palm oil thing is a really good example because you're talking about working with the legal community. What else is going on right now? And for the animal law community to get involved and work with science to make the difference, to say this is the impact and this is how we can actually have an impact on the communities and on the animals who are being affected by it. How can the lawyers help you out?
So how can you use legal tools that really apply to the rights of the animals themselves, right? And the awareness that comes with that. Do you think that additional legal tools that protect the animals themselves would be helpful where you're working? Something along the lines of what she was saying? Or does that vary a lot, country by country? Or is it perhaps, one concern I have is that it's already hard to enforce the laws that you already have, right? And how they apply to environmental issues. But is this something that you feel would be a helpful tool to have more legal tools applying to the animals themselves? You have your own.
In my opinion, the lawyers could do so much more for the environment, so much more to protect the rights of this wildlife, because obviously none of the elephant or orangutan would walk into the court to defend themselves. And in addition to that, in Indonesia we have rather old law that haven't been revised and not really updated to the current science. We are a little bit slow in updating our legal knowledge on things. But then at the same time, we still battling the very basic battle of trying to protect an area that is already protected on paper, trying to increase that kind of protection, trying to prevent our government through the corrupt system from dismantling protection of these places. So yes, we go to court a lot. Sometimes we have a real battle against a company for large areas. Sometimes we're trying to push wildlife traders to pay the price or pay fine and go to jail for what they did. But we are still a long way away from achieving the kind of progress that you folks are having here on this side of the world.
Do you have something to add to that question, or should we move to the next one?
Okay. I think there is really much which need to be done when it comes to animal rights and also wildlife laws. For instance, when we talk of animal rights and animal laws, I think it is very important to have a very strong legal framework in that field, because that can help us actually to prevent pet trade, which is actually one of the main problems with primates. And secondly, probably talking of the experience I have from my country, some animals, when it comes to the rights of protection, are better than others. In Kenya, I sit in the National Primate Task Force, and one of the things we keep on saying is like, primates in our country, they don't have voices like lions, elephants, and rhinos. And I think they are only protected by the general ban on hunting. No other legal framework which protects them, as opposed to things like lions and other endangered species. So I think it's the right time for us to come with very strong legal frameworks to also protect these other species which we feel they are threatened. We have to appreciate the value of every other species in the ecosystem and realize that the role they play is also important. The other thing is, even when it comes to implementing these laws, we've seen a lot of flexibility. Like, we have very...
what? Flexibility?
Yeah, and we have very, I'll not say lenient, but...
Leniency.
Yeah, like if you say, for example, if you get a mangabey as a pet, and probably you are charged in a court of law and you are charged like $2, it's then worth keeping the thing as a pet and pay you $2.
Right.
And in that case, the law doesn't have effect. So we have to think in those directions and see if we can have effective laws.
So stronger enforcement, stronger laws, stringent, and thinking really about the whole framework of the law. Yeah, wonderful. Let's move to another question, unless you have something. Yes, sure. What's your name and tell us? Yes.
Douglas.
Oops.
And from Jamaica, but I live here in New York. Great panel. I had a question going back to some stuff that you already said. For example, Stan, I thought you made the
Speak
great
a little
point
louder. Yeah, thank
that people identified with conservation because of you or other individuals who worked in conservation. Also, it was also very well established that people had some negative associations with the species, for example, as pests in human wildlife conflict. Could you say just a little bit more in terms of the historical meanings that people associated with primates, and whether and how these meanings have been incorporated into conservation efforts, be it in terms of use in education, either positives meanings, whatever meanings there are, and how these meanings, both positives and negatives, may have been being applied and used in terms of trying to encourage people to live with wildlife and coexist with wildlife.
Thank you, Leo, for your question. Who would like to take Leo's question? You want to start, Stan? Anybody? Nora?
Just very quickly, I was going to say something, and Luisa, of course you know this, but the word for orangutan means person of the forest. And so I think that the orangutan is an example of one of the great apes that has been personified by many people. And there are, in some areas, there are protections, there are taboos against harming him because of the close relationship that they have with us.
Any other thoughts on that question?
I think maybe to follow up with his question on how conservation plays with regards to understanding the historical background of the communities and actually involving them in conservation and letting them hone that. That takes me back to one of the questions you asked about what are we missing in primate conservation? And again, drawing from the experience I have from the side I'm working, like when I went there to do my PhD arc, one of the components of my study was to train a very local person from the local community at a master's level. But unfortunately, I couldn't get anyone. Yet we've been working in that area from 1960s when first researchers ventured in that area. So that tells me, for all that time, probably we've not built the appropriate capacity for the local communities even to understand conservation better and maybe
And shape it too,
and
right?
shape it using
Shape
the
it
new
according
tools
to
and
their
technologies.
values.
Yeah. So that's one gap we are missing. Most of us think capacity building is going there and getting few researchers working with them for 10 months and you leave. You've done capacity building. I would say that is not capacity building. We need people who can come in those areas. They understand the historical background, like he has said.
Yes.
They understand the land tenure systems.
The culture, really.
And they understand the culture. And if they are so much educated and aware of the importance of conserving these species, they can even step in actually influencing the other people who could be against some of the good ideas that can help in conservation.
They can be a catalyst.
Exactly. So one of the missing link we have is like most of the kind of projects we do, we miss a point. We don't really make efforts to understand the culture, the historical background of the communities. And then we come with our own ideas and we think they are the super ideas. So what happens? The community step back and let you do whatever you want to do and you leave. And sometimes you may reach a point whereby you are so annoying and they leave the whole thing. The side I'm working is one of the most controversial sides. In 2000, we had women dancing naked to chase researchers from the side. That tells you how far things can go if you don't understand the culture and the historical background of the communities.
Very interesting. Wiza, you said you wanted to add something.
Just a little bit to add to what Nora said. Yes, in Indonesia, the literal translation of orang utan is the man of the forest. That's how we used to see this particular primate. Back before the encroachment of monoculture wiped out our forests, people have been interacting with wildlife, has been interacting with primates. At least I know in the province where I come from, we have names for elephants, we have names for tigers, we have names for orangutans by means of respect, because we coexist with them for generations. Back then, we don't have thousands and thousands of hectares of oil palm plantations. We have diverse agroforestry. We plant nutmegs, we have cloves, we have different spices that we trade with the outside world. Now those are replaced with a single crop, palm oil. When these changes happen on our landscape, our interaction with wildlife change. That's the historical background. It's not necessarily we need to go back there, but to be aware that any single crop monoculture is not good for the people, it's not good for the wildlife. It is good for business though.
Thank you, Wiza. We're going to go to a question up there on the second level.
Good evening. My name is Mark. I'm from New York. A question has to do with terrorism was touched upon, and now wildlife trafficking it's a crime, but a lot of this money funds organized crime and terrorism. So I was wondering if there are any efforts afoot to, I was hoping it was going to happen in this administration, but it didn't, to recategorize wildlife trafficking, poaching, things like this as active terrorism, either through the UN, because the infrastructure and funding is already in existence to fight that, and people who are not necessarily might be as concerned about conservation, there's a fringe benefit to the animals, but then you're also combating terrorism. So is there any effort afoot to recategorize what's happening as really active terrorism due to the funding stream?
Let's see if the panelists have thoughts on that. Also, Leo, who just asked the last question, happens to know a fair amount of about this. So if you want, you can add something. We have an expert on that topic sitting right there. So what are your thoughts?
I really don't know if I will adequately answer your question, but I'll just try. But I think things like hunting and other kind of things which have direct harm to the wildlife, we can group them as wildlife crimes, and there is whole section dealing with that in the conservation. But when I talked of things like terrorism, I actually wanted to imply the negative impacts which actually things like something like terrorism can have in conservation. When it denies people accessibility to the resource to understand the kind of species they want to study, or even when it denies the people who are really for conservation the opportunity to start initiatives in particular areas to conserve certain target species.
Right. So the impacts are many and different, right?
Exactly. And like everyone, no one will want to work in an area where it's really threatened.
Where there is,
you will end up being eliminated, like the species you are trying to conserve. So in that case, I think we should think of the impacts of terrorism, not like the grouping all together with
I think as the links between kind of international terrorism and crime and wildlife trade become clearer, and I think they are becoming clearer, I think that is a direction that the global legal community could go that could be very effective. I think the problem and the challenge is distinguishing between these kinds of organized efforts and then, for example, hunting on the part of a local community. So in a way, you have to be very careful about the scales and the context. But I do think that there's potential there, and that is actually quite true. One or two more questions, I think, and we're going to have to close this panel, sadly. So do we have one more question? I'm sorry, John, but David, but the mic is in the back, and I think they've been raising their hand for a while. So yes, please go ahead.
Hi there. My name's Munir. I'm 20 years old. I go to Hunter College.
Welcome.
So I noticed, this is a great panel, by the way, but I noticed that you all, as well as animal conservationists in general, they talk about animal conservation more as a moral thing, as in we need to save the primates or the elephants or these animals so that our children and grandchildren can see them. Now, this is going to sound like a funny term, but there are many conservative conservationists that feel that the resources should be better accumulated in certain fields that in some way end up helping humans, as in that we need to focus more on environmental conservation for the sake of humans rather than animals. And that if we are going to focus on animal conservation, these should be keystone species that in some way help the environment or help the ecosystem. Is there any argument, this is my question, is there any argument that you can come up with that primates are a keystone species whose actions and relations to the environment somehow help humans?
The question is really, can we come up with utilitarian arguments? So, what kind of service do primates provide for the communities that they work with beyond, say, how the global community may value them just for their existence, right? Is that what you're saying? So thoughts on that?
Sort of a tangential point is that the money that's spent on primate conservation, for example, would be much less than that is already spent on human activities and human conservation. So I think that it already is a fairly unbalanced thing.
By human conservation, you mean development, or?
Well, conservation and health and all those,
Right.
all
Okay.
of those related fields.
Yes. Do you have thoughts about this, Wiza, Stan?
Maybe thinking of primates as keystone species, I cannot really say much on that, but one of the key things is there are now evidence that primates really play a very crucial role in seed dispersal and pollination. These are very crucial activities when it comes to the functioning of an ecosystem. So there are some specific plant species which are pollinated by primates. So you can imagine if we remove primates from that kind of ecosystem, we are creating that kind of cascading effect, because we don't know actually how many other species depend on that particular one species which is actually pollinated by the primates. So for this case, although there isn't much studies to pin down primates as really keystone species like we've seen with other species, when we look at the ecological role they play, they are really important and they deserve, they are worthy of our conservation efforts.
I would like to add that we have seen some important studies about primates, for instance, and their value as seed dispersers and in how they maintain forests overall as well, for example. And so, you can argue that. But I think it's important to remember that it's not one or the other, right? We can value primates, we can value them for their right to exist, we can value their services to us, even if they're indirect. And we can also value our relationship with them and what they mean for humans and, all of the other kind of influence they have had and they continue to have in how we see ourselves as human and perhaps how communities interact around them. So there's a lot of values, I think. And I think the important thing about values is you can talk about values all you want, but you have to kind of land it on a specific context and situation for it to really make sense. So before we end, I just want to leave everybody in the audience with a final thought from our panelists. We're almost closing. But I asked them and before we end, actually, I also want to thank all the wonderful supporters who made this event possible, including the conference and this particular event. And so I want to thank Marshall M. Weinberg, who supported the Student Conference on Conservation Science, as well as the generous support provided by the Arcus Foundation specifically for this event. We are very grateful to you. Also grateful to Vivian H. Donnelly and Strawn Donnelly Family Charitable Lead Unit Trust, the Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Sciences, and their Tropical Research Institute, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and Harvard Forest, and the University of Michigan. They have all been wonderful supporters of our activities. And so, to end, I wanted to ask our wonderful panelists a closing question, which is, what advice would they have for the citizens and also the young and emerging conservationists that are in the audience as they try to make their way in conservation? If you had to leave them with some words of wisdom or something that you think is important and has worked for you, briefly, what would be your parting advice?
Mine would be very simple, and that is to never give up. Never let anybody else tell you what you can and cannot do, and if one road is closed to you, find another.
Wonderful. Stan, how about you?
I would say conservation is a responsibility of everyone. If you don't conserve, who are you looking for to conserve? Every simple thing you do, like actually throwing this plastic bottle in a dustbin, you help life to survive on Earth. So do something to change species survival in a positive way.
Thank you. And Wiza?
One morning, I come into the office. I was a bit early, 7 a.m. I haven't even had my coffee. And then my boss marched into the room where I was working, and he was like, so pissed off. And he was like, Wiza, are you angry? And I'm like, what? No. And it's like, what? You're not angry? Well, you should be, because anger fuels revolution. I haven't had my coffee, so it's a bit hard to digest what he was saying. But many months, many years later, I start to understand each and every one of us have that anger. Now it depends where we channel that anger. So yeah, be angry. Be angry about the situation and change it.
Make something out of your anger. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's been really wonderful. Thank you.